They thought he was just another name, another face in the crowd, another life swallowed by a system designed to forget. But Malik Evans wasn't born to be forgotten. He was born to fight. And today, the world will remember his name. The courthouse smelled like old wood and older prejudice. The walls, yellowed with time and secrets, seemed to whisper stories of verdicts long decided before evidence was heard. Outside, the air vibrated with anger. Chants for justice ricocheting off the stone facade, police barricades attempting to contain a restless crowd armed with posters and raw pain. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with the low hum of expectation. Every seat was taken, the air heavy with judgment. Journalists scribbled notes, defense lawyers whispered nervously. Everyone knew how this story was supposed to end. At the defendant's table sat Malik Evans, 26, black, accused of assaulting a police officer. To most in the room, he wasn't Malik. He was a headline, a statistic, a warning. Malik wore a second-hand suit, shoulders too broad for its narrow seams. His hands, calloused from years of labor, rested neatly on the table. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, those deep, defiant eyes, told another story. Judge Martha Whitmore entered, the gavel's crack a sharp reminder of who held the power here. An old lioness of the court, her icy demeanor was legend. "Court is now in session," she announced, her voice slicing through the murmurs. The prosecutor, Jacob Whitman, rose, smug and sure. He adjusted his Rolex, smirked at the jury. "Your Honor," he began, oozing confidence, "the evidence against Mr. Evans is overwhelming. Witnesses, video footage, and officers' sworn testimony. This is not just a trial. It is a necessary affirmation of law and order." Murmurs of approval rippled. Judge Whitmore nodded slightly. "Defense?" Malik stood slowly. The room collectively inhaled. "Your Honor," Malik said, voice low but firm, "I respectfully request the court's permission to submit new evidence." A rustle of surprise. "Where is your counsel?" Judge Whitmore demanded. "I waived my right," Malik replied. "I trust myself." Snickers from the gallery. The prosecutor shook his head in mock pity. But Malik walked to the bench and placed a thick manila envelope before the judge. Inside, buried complaints against Officer Grant, unseen footage from surrounding businesses, testimonies ignored, lost, or intentionally silenced. The judge opened the folder, frowned. Whitman leapt up. "Objection! Overruled!" Judge Whitmore barked, surprising even herself. Malik turned to the jury, to the spectators, to the nation watching through tiny glowing screens. "You've been shown a story," he said. "Half the truth. Maybe less. It's time you saw the rest." He motioned to the bailiff. The screen lit up with the true footage. Malik, with his hands raised, unarmed, attacked by Officer Grant without warning. Shock flooded the courtroom. Whitman fumbled. This is misleading." Malik lifted his chin. "The truth is never misleading." When the judge finally dismissed the charges, the room erupted, some in applause, others in stunned silence. Malik gathered his papers calmly. He walked out not as a defendant, but as a symbol. The fight was just beginning. The news hit like a tidal wave, crashing into every corner of American society with a force that couldn't be ignored. Cable shows dissected every frame of the courtroom footage, their screens filled with slow-motion replays of Malik standing tall, facing the weight of a system that had tried to crush him. Analysts argued furiously over Malik's every word, every subtle movement, reading into his posture, his calmness, his quiet refusal to be broken. Late-night comedians mocked the prosecution's failure, turning their arrogance into punchlines, while daytime talk show hosts lauded Malik as a new voice of justice, a beacon in an otherwise dark landscape. Hashtags like "Your Justice for Malik," "Your System on Trial," and "Black Lives Matter" surged to the top of trending lists worldwide. Clips of Malik standing resolute against the judge's icy stare amassed millions of views within hours. Memes, murals, and protest songs sprung up overnight, his image painted across alley walls and woven into the fabric of a restless generation's dreams. Civil rights leaders reached out. some offering genuine guidance born from lifetimes of struggle, others seeking a new figurehead to rally behind, to breathe fresh life into tired slogans. Politicians scrambled to align themselves with him, issuing carefully curated statements about the need for change, careful not to offend, but desperate not to be left behind. Corporations, always quick to sense an opportunity, offered Malik lucrative sponsorships, TV appearances, glossy book deals, speaking tours with six-figure fees, a chance to turn his pain into their profit. Some voices on the streets whispered, "Sell out," a warning to guard his soul. Others urged, "Speak out," desperate for him to lead the charge. But Malik? He chose a third path. He retreated. Far from the flashing cameras, the breathless news cycles, and the endless din of opinions, Malik returned to the cracked, forgotten library of his childhood. The once grand building, now battered by time, stood as a silent monument to resilience. Paint peeled from its walls like old scabs, floor tiles cracked underfoot, and the smell of dust and old paper lingered in the air like the memory of battles fought and lost. Here, surrounded by sagging shelves and the ghostly whispers of generations who had once dared to dream, Malik found his sanctuary. The heavy, worn books seemed to sigh when he touched them, grateful for hands that still cared. He sat for hours, hunched over tattered biographies of heroes, Rosa Parks, who sat down so a nation could stand, Malcolm X, who turned righteous anger into a call to action, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who carried the weight of millions in every weary step. The smell of old paper and older dreams wrapped around him like a cocoon, shutting out the roar of the outside world. His phone buzzed relentlessly on the worn oak table. Journalists demanded sound bites. Agents dangled contracts. Political operatives spun visions of a future wrapped in money and influence. Each message, each call, another thread trying to pull him away from himself. He ignored them all. Only one message caught his eye. A simple text from his childhood friend Dante. "They're scared, bro. That means you're doing it right." Those few words grounded him more than all the interviews and applause ever could. They reminded him why he had fought in the first place, not for fame, not for fortune, but for something real. So he began again, quietly, fiercely. He launched Know Your Rights seminars at rundown community centers, where ceilings leaked onto peeling linoleum floors and ancient heaters rattled against winter winds. He stood beneath flickering fluorescent lights, teaching neighbors how to protect themselves, how to document injustice, how to survive encounters designed to silence them. He set up defense workshops in dimly lit church basements, speaking over the hum of broken air conditioners, drilling communities on their constitutional rights, on the power of collective resistance. He created online courses, free, accessible, simple, cutting through the legal jargon designed to confuse and entrap. His lessons spread like wildfire, shared from phone to phone, reaching people who had never before believed the system could be challenged, let alone changed. His network grew underground, unseen but unstoppable, like roots spreading beneath concrete, quietly undermining structures built to last forever. But progress, real progress, came at a cost. The threats followed swiftly, creeping into Malik's life like cold tendrils of smoke. Dead rats were left on his doorstep, grotesque warnings wrapped in bloodied newspaper. Voicemails filled with racial slurs and promises of violence clogged his inbox, a daily barrage of hatred meant to wear him down. One night, after returning from a seminar, he found the windows of the small community office shattered. Inside, the charred remnants of a Molotov cocktail still smoldered among overturned chairs and burned papers. The walls, once lined with posters of hope, were blackened with soot. The police arrived hours later, apathetic and indifferent. "No suspects," they said. "No evidence." But Malik didn't bend. He boarded up the windows himself, scrubbed the walls clean with his own hands, replaced the destroyed materials out of his own dwindling savings. He launched Know Your Rights seminars at rundown community centers, where ceilings leaked onto peeling linoleum floors and ancient heaters rattled against winter winds. He stood beneath flickering fluorescent lights, teaching neighbors how to protect themselves, how to document injustice, how to survive encounters designed to silence them. He set up defense workshops in dimly lit church basements, speaking over the hum of broken air conditioners, drilling communities on their constitutional rights, on the power of collective resistance. He created online courses, free, accessible, simple, cutting through the legal jargon designed to confuse and entrap. His lessons spread like wildfire, shared from phone to phone, reaching people who had never before believed the system could be challenged, let alone changed. His network grew underground, unseen but unstoppable, like roots spreading beneath concrete, quietly undermining structures built to last forever. But progress, real progress, came at a cost. The threats followed swiftly, creeping into Malik's life like cold tendrils of smoke. Dead rats were left on his doorstep, grotesque warnings wrapped in bloodied newspaper. Voicemails filled with racial slurs and promises of violence clogged his inbox, a daily barrage of hatred meant to wear him down. One night, after returning from a seminar, he found the windows of the small community office shattered. Inside, the charred remnants of a Molotov cocktail still smoldered among overturned chairs and burned papers. The walls, once lined with posters of hope, were blackened with soot. The police arrived hours later, apathetic and indifferent. No suspects, they said. No evidence. But Malik didn't bend. He boarded up the windows himself, scrubbed the walls clean with his own hands, replaced the destroyed materials out of his own dwindling savings. He kept teaching. He kept building. He refused to be pushed back into the shadows. One rainy night, after a long meeting with exhausted but determined local activists, Malik stepped into the deserted parking lot. His breath misted in the cold night air. That's when he saw it. A police cruiser, idling. Its headlights were off, its silhouette barely visible against the misty gloom. It crept forward, slow and predatory, each roll of its tires a quiet threat. Malik's heart pounded against his ribs, adrenaline flooding his veins, every instinct screaming at him to run, to disappear into the shadows. But he didn't. He stopped, turned to face the car, planting his feet firmly on the slick asphalt. The cruiser stopped too, barely a few feet away. Behind the windshield, the driver's face was hidden, a shapeless shadow of authority. Malik reached slowly into his coat. He pulled out his phone, and he started recording. For a long, suffocating moment, the parking lot crackled with the electric possibility of violence. A thin line stretched to its breaking point. Then, with a screech of wet tires, the cruiser peeled away, disappearing into the night, leaving only the echoes of its retreat behind. Malik stood alone in the rain, the cold soaking through his jacket and into his bones. But he wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Because Malik understood something now, something etched deep into the marrow of his soul. Fear was their weapon, and he refused to be their victim. Instead, he chose to become their reckoning. 6 months later, the Malik Evans Legal Defense Fund wasn't just surviving, it was a wildfire of hope spreading across the country, igniting hearts and minds in places where despair had long reigned. What had started as a whisper of defiance against an unjust system had transformed into a resounding call for justice that reverberated from coast to coast. In every corner of the nation, communities that had long suffered in silence found their voice, empowered by Malik's unwavering commitment to their cause. Grassroots chapters blossomed in cities and towns alike. Detroit, Atlanta, Oakland, and even in conservative strongholds, where whispers of justice had once been smothered by fear and conformity. These were places where dissent had been muffled, where the desire for change had been squashed by the weight of tradition. But now those silenced voices had found a platform, a rallying cry. The Malik Evans Legal Defense Fund wasn't just a movement, it was a revolution. Retired judges with guilty consciences, law students hungry for real change, paralegals who had seen the rot from the inside, and even a few police officers, disillusioned with the corruption they once upheld, joined Malik's cause. It was a coalition of the willing, united by a shared vision of a justice system that would no longer serve as a tool of oppression, but as a beacon of fairness. One humid evening, Under the buzzing lights of a gymnasium-turned-rally hall, Malik stood before a packed crowd. The air was thick with anticipation, a mixture of hope and skepticism that clung to the walls like the heat. Rows upon rows of eager faces stared back at him, some hopeful, some skeptical, all desperate for change. Every pair of eyes reflected the same question: what happens next? The bleachers groaned under the weight of expectation, the crowd holding its collective breath as Malik stepped up to the podium. His presence was magnetic, his resolve unwavering. He knew the stakes, he knew the risks, but he also knew this moment was bigger than any one person, even bigger than him. "They called me a thug," Malik said, his voice steady, electric, cutting through the tension in the room. "But the real thugs are those who betray the badge they swore to honor." The crowd erupted, a thunderous affirmation that shook the rafters. It wasn't just applause. It was the sound of decades of pent-up frustration, the sound of years of systemic abuse being challenged for the first time. Malik raised his hand for silence, and as the room quieted, he continued. "But hear me," he said, his tone softer now, but no less powerful. "This isn't about revenge. This is about revolution, a revolution of rights, dignity, and truth." With a click of the remote, a giant screen behind him lit up with images of victims wronged by the system, faces young and old, smiles extinguished too soon, lives cut short or ruined by an unyielding, oppressive force. The gym fell into a heavy silence, grief and rage thick in the air, the weight of the injustice laid bare for all to see. Malik paused, allowing the faces on the screen to do the speaking for him. Then, with a movement that shocked even those closest to him, he invited a former officer to the stage, Daniel Monroe, a man who had resigned in protest after witnessing brutality from within the force, a man who had chosen conscience over loyalty. Monroe's hands trembled as he clutched the microphone, the weight of his guilt palpable in the air. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking under the strain of years of unspoken regret. "I stayed silent too long. I see you now. I see what I helped break, and I want to help rebuild." The audience held its breath, their collective disbelief mingling with hope. Here was a man who had been part of the system, who had once upheld it, now standing in the light, confessing his sins and offering his support. It was a gesture of humility, a sign of change that felt both revolutionary and personal. And then, like a dam breaking, applause erupted, tentative at first, as if unsure of the sincerity of the moment, but then roaring, a tidal wave of emotion that drowned out the years of mistrust and fear. For that brief, fleeting moment, the crowd felt as if they had been part of something bigger than themselves, a movement that had the potential to alter the course of history. Malik smiled grimly, knowing that this was just the beginning. Change was slow, it was messy, it was painful, but it had begun. And with each step forward, no matter how small, the movement grew stronger, more resolute. This wasn't just a fight for justice. It was a fight for the soul of a nation, for the redemption of those who had been wronged, and for the hope that, in the end, truth and dignity would prevail. A year later, Malik entered the courthouse not as a defendant, but as a plaintiff. He wore a sharply tailored suit, dark navy with a crisp white shirt, a subtle nod to the battles fought and the wars yet to come. His stride was confident, measured, a man who understood that every step he took across those marble floors echoed with the weight of history. The lawsuit was unprecedented, a sweeping class action case against the police department that had once tried to silence him. Hundreds of plaintiffs, thousands of pages of evidence, generations of pain etched into affidavits and testimonies. The courtroom buzzed with a nervous energy. Reporters packed the pews. Protesters outside hoisted banners into the sky. The world watched, breathless, undefined. At the defense table, the department's high-priced lawyers sat with smug confidence, designer suits and gold watches gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. They whispered and smirked, certain that their money and influence would crush him, just as it had crushed so many others before. But Malik was ready. The trial unfolded like a slow, relentless storm. Over weeks of brutal testimony, Malik methodically tore down the wall of lies brick by brick. Each witness he called, Each piece of evidence he presented chipped away at the facade the department had hidden behind for decades. He showed the jury security footage of officers planting drugs during routine stops, played secret recordings of locker room boasts about teaching lessons to those who forgot their place, introduced whistleblowers who had risked careers, reputations, even their lives to tell the truth. He called mothers who sat trembling on the witness stand, speaking through sobs about sons who never came home from routine traffic stops, fathers who clutched crumpled photographs like sacred relics, trying to keep alive memories that the system had tried to erase. He projected cold, damning data onto giant screens, racial profiling statistics, arrest rates that soared for black and brown communities, disciplinary actions swept under bureaucratic rugs. The defense squirmed, objected, protested. They filibustered and flailed, but it was like trying to stop an avalanche with bare hands. The truth was a tidal wave now, and it was impossible to hold back. Every day, Malik stood stronger, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been crushed beneath the system's weight. When Malik finally rested his case, a palpable silence filled the courtroom. The jury, made up of people from every walk of life, many wiping tears from their cheeks, sat motionless. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty. A record-breaking settlement that sent shockwaves across the nation. Mass firings within the department. Sweeping reforms mandated by the court. Mandatory body cameras. Independent oversight committees. Community-elected review boards. And retraining from the ground up. As the judge banged her gavel to seal the decision, Malik sat still, eyes closed, the magnitude of the moment washing over him like a long-delayed cleansing storm. But he knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning. Years rolled on, relentless and indifferent, but change, once so elusive, now moved with stubborn persistence. The reforms sparked by Malik's case spread like wildfire, igniting a movement that burned through complacency and corruption. Police departments across the country underwent rigorous civilian audits, forcing a reckoning with decades of misconduct. Entire precincts were dismantled and rebuilt under new codes of conduct, created not in secret boardrooms, but in town halls where every voice mattered. Schools rewrote their curricula, ripping out sanitized paragraphs and replacing them with the full, brutal truth of systemic injustice. Textbooks, once silent about racial terror, now spoke loudly, and children who looked like Malik saw themselves reflected not as victims, but as catalysts for change. Undefined voting rights expanded in states where suppression had been a bitter reality for generations. Gerrymandered lines were redrawn, polling places reopened, and new legislation made it harder, not easier, to strip away a citizen's voice. Policies that once seemed untouchable crumbled under the pressure of a people who finally understood their collective power. Protests evolved into policy changes. Hashtags became laws. Outrage became organized action. And at the heart of it, quietly, stubbornly, was Malik Evans. Malik became a symbol, reluctantly at first, but undeniably. His name appeared in history books, his face on murals spanning brick walls from Harlem to Oakland. He graced magazine covers, though he rarely granted interviews, uncomfortable with celebrity but understanding its usefulness in the fight. Streets were named after him, winding through cities once marked by redlining and division. Scholarships were established in his honor, funding the education of young people who would carry the torch even further. He turned down political offers, resisting the temptation to become another face in a system he still didn't fully trust. He refused book deals that sought to sanitize and market his struggle, to package his pain into neat, profitable narratives. Instead, Malik chose to stay in the trenches. He quietly mentored young activists, teaching them how to organize, how to endure, how to resist without losing their humanity. He opened free legal clinics in forgotten neighborhoods. He gave speeches not on grand stages, but in community centers where folding chairs wobbled and microphones crackled. He never stopped fighting. Outside the courthouse, where he had once stood alone against a mountain of prejudice, a statue rose, bronze, taller than life. A young black man, suit slightly rumpled from the battles he had fought, one hand clutching a thick folder of legal briefs, the other extended outward, not in anger, not in surrender, but in a solemn, eternal vow. Children climbed its base in the summertime, pretending to be warriors for justice. Old men sat on nearby benches, tipping their hats to the memory of a man who had refused to bow. The plaque at the statue's base read, "Malik Evans, proof that justice demands courage." Tourists snapped photos. Teachers led solemn field trips. Children traced the bronze hand with their small fingers, eyes wide with questions and wonder. And sometimes, when the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the courthouse steps, an older man with gray streaking his hair and a fire still burning in his eyes would walk by. He would pause, hands tucked into the pockets of a well-worn coat, and smile softly, quietly. Because Malik Evans knew the truth. They had tried to silence him. They had tried to bury him. But he was not a seed meant for silence. He was a seed meant to crack the very foundation of injustice. And he had. His story, once almost erased, now lived on in classrooms, courtrooms, and quiet moments when one person decided to stand up against the tide. And though his own fight had ended, the echo of his footsteps still rumbled through history, louder and louder with each new generation asking not, "Can we change?" but "How soon will we finish what he started?"